So many people's problems at work, I find, come from their internal alignment and relationship towards work being one of conflict and one of, this isn't the right job for me. I need to get a raise. I need to find a new job. I need to find a new career, and on the list goes. And so when I work with people, I always start from a place of, how would things change for you if I told you that you were in the perfect place for yourself right now? You are exactly where you belong.
Welcome to Vibecast, the podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of workplace culture. I'm your host, Kristi Skutvik. Join me in conversations with extraordinary leaders as we unravel their experiences, both positive and negative, that have impacted workplace culture. This podcast is more than storytelling. It's about actionable insights. Are you ready to transform the vibe at your workplace? Let's go. Today, I'm talking with Sam Dailey. Sam is a master facilitator of leadership training and development programs for startups and their executives. His niche is with individuals in the finance and technology sectors. Early in his career, he had the opportunity to work closely with boards, executives, and leadership teams. He worked in venture capital investing and as a chief of staff at a software startup. In these roles, he saw the very human problems that leaders of all backgrounds struggled with. After a transformative experience with a prolonged illness, he chose to launch his own coaching business to help individuals and teams solve their most real people problems. Authenticity is the name of the game, and that is why we are so excited to hear from Sam. Let's get to it.
To me, a vibe I like to think of in the sense of how at work we show up and how we behave towards other people. I focus really on interpersonal behavior when I'm talking about work, and I think teams are defined by how people behave towards each other, how they talk to each other, how they talk about each other, not to each other. And I think there's a real tendency at work to focus on performance and results more so than behavior. And I think because of that, there's bad behavior and there's bad results. So I really like the focus on behavior when it comes to vibes.
And that behavior, why do you think it gets lost in the shuffle of work? Like, why isn't it a focus for some companies?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I spend a lot of time thinking about that because it's pretty ubiquitous. It's everywhere. I think that work tends to bring out the worst in us in a lot of ways. The metaphor I like to use in the framework, and I'm probably going to come back to this a lot throughout our conversation, so it's a good one to introduce now, is the idea of opening versus closing. And I think I associate that on a personal level, openness with honesty, vulnerability, also with like inspiration and effort. Mm-hmm. And I find that work tends to be an environment more so of closing, where people, they feel a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Things feel rushed. There's such a sense of urgency and performance and delivery, and how that makes us feel as people is closed. So it adds pressure. It tends to add stress. Mm-hmm. So there's so much stress in workplaces. And I think, to come back to your question, that leads to bad behavior. We focus on where we want to get to as people with outcomes. So we focus on getting a promotion, getting a raise, hitting a sales target, finishing a project. It's all really focused on output and outcome.
Yeah.
Because there's so much of it. There's so much to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels as if focusing on behavior is somehow a distraction, or it's not important enough, or it's not going to help us get the job done, so to speak. And I find that to be backwards.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much to get done and a lack of focus on behaviors and good behaviors. Tell us how that has manifest, right? In a bad way, where it's just created just toxic vibes, if you will. And maybe toxic's too strong of a word, but a place where it's just like, this could be so cool. And yet, because all we focused on is performance, it's bad.
One way certainly is, I remember a story once of a colleague coming to me and a few other members of a leadership team and telling us that he was burnt out, that he was, I think the way he put it is, I'm redlining. And the response, which I was a part of, I didn't feel a part of. I didn't feel ownership over this because I wasn't the most senior member of the team. But looking back on it, I was a person that he came and talked to. The response was essentially, we're working twice as hard as this guy is. Why is he complaining to us? He doesn't know what burnout really is. And then, do we really want this guy on our team if this is how he feels? And I think in hindsight, it was such a bad response to someone. It was clearly a cry for help. If you're going to your boss and saying, I am burnt out, I'm overworked, I need help, there's a real problem there. And it takes courage to have that conversation. So to respond to that with anything but respect, I think is a bad vibe. It's a vibe killer. And regardless of our own personal feelings on it, I think that we didn't have an honest conversation in response. We had this conversation amongst ourselves, gossiping about this person. And rather than asking questions, figuring out what the real source of the problem was, finding out how hard this person was working and what we could do to help and be supportive, it was just like turned into a gossiping session. I don't know if anyone ever followed up with the person. I don't think that anyone did, and just kind of moved on. So it was a combination of, one, like ignoring a red flag, which is burnout. And then two is not really addressing the conversation. If our honest thoughts on it were, this person is not working hard enough, and if they are burnt out now, then maybe they don't belong on this team, then we should have had that conversation with that person. So I think it was a twofold problem there.
Do you know, did that person end up leaving?
Yeah, the person did end up leaving, which should not come as a surprise to anyone. I have one other story.
Oh, yeah.
I've been in that boat before as well. So a story from kind of my perspective being in those shoes is, I worked with a boss in a normal kind of corporate environment for 7 or 8 years. I asked for a raise once in that period. So I'm not someone who was great at, first of all, self-advocacy, but second of all, I'm patient. So I've only ever once asked for a raise. And I explained why I was doing so to my boss at the time. And the response that I got was, thank you for bringing this up. I need to have a few conversations about it, and we'll get back to you. That was the only conversation I ever had about it. I never heard anything back. And that was bad for vibes. So I know what it's like to be on the receiving end, where it's really hard to give feedback up in an organization to your superiors.
Yeah.
And I've seen and heard so many examples of people doing that, people saying, this is what I need, this is why I'm not happy. And the response from leadership being, so what? Or to gossip about the person, or to say they don't really know what they want, they don't know how good, a million ways of really being defensive over that feedback and not addressing it honestly and directly with someone. And it really is bad for motivation. Like for me in that situation,
Sure.
to have that conversation, to muster up the courage to finally say, like,
Right.
I really feel undervalued and underpaid. And then crickets.
Right. Yeah, even if the leader came back around, right? So what I'm hearing you say too is like, even if it's delivering bad news or something, it's not good news or what you necessarily want to hear. Like, oh yeah, Sam, you're going to get like a $200,000 raise. Even if it's like, hey, the time isn't right now and I hear you, and let's talk about this in 6 months. And then at least it gives you the opportunity to make a decision for yourself on like what the vibe of that organization is and if you want to stay within that organization, right? But just to hear nothing, because in the absence of information, people create stories. So I'm sure you created a story that may or may not have been true, but you have to rationalize the reason for not hearing the feedback. So that's a great example, and I think a great kind of takeaway to like, hey, at the very least, to use a corporate term, close the loop.
Exactly. And as you said, it comes from a place of, it's not that there's any real bad or negative intent. It's people don't want to have hard conversations. People don't want to deliver bad news. And it's so much better to explain yourself. Just say like, hey, can't do this now. We heard you. This is why. Keep in touch. Just that simple follow-up would really mean a lot in so many situations. And a lot of leaders aren't practiced in having slightly uncomfortable conversations.
Totally. But yet it leads to an even more uncomfortable conversation, right? When the person either escalates it further, or just leaves. Like that
Yeah.
actually becomes more uncomfortable and more destructive for the vibe of an organization than just having the tough conversation in the moment. Okay, so on the flip side, tell us where you've seen this, or like even in your coaching practice, right? Where you've encouraged somebody to do something and it's really had a very positive effect, and like what they did in those small kind of micro moments that matter.
Yeah. I have a few particular stories come to mind for me, and they're all ones that seem really small, which is interesting to just reflect on when I thought about like the moments in my entire career that have created the best vibes for me. I want to talk about two particular stories that came up that are just so small and so easy. So the first one, similar to what we've been talking about, I was new to a job. I was working at a venture capital company, and I'd been there for 6 months or so, and I was still uncomfortable and unsure of myself. And I was working on a particular project with a partner there. And a few weeks into the project, I was sitting at my desk at like 9 a.m, and he walked past with a coffee in his hand. I think he had just gotten into the office, and he stopped by my desk and he was like, "Sam, I just wanted to give you some kind of unprompted feedback, if that's okay." And he proceeded to give me like just probably 60 seconds worth of feedback. Now, it helped that it was almost all positive. He was like, "You're doing a great job on this project. I notice how hard you're working and I really appreciate it." I can't remember, there might have been some room for improvement as well in the feedback, but honestly, it didn't matter what he said. What mattered to me is that he was giving me feedback. And honestly, the other thing that stuck with me is how I could tell he was a little uncomfortable doing it. He like seemed almost a little startled by himself. And that made it mean so much more to me. I was like, I can tell that he doesn't necessarily want to be doing this and that he's not necessarily very practiced in this, but he's doing it anyway for my benefit because he wants to help encourage me and help me grow. And that, going back to our last conversation around just a little bit of discomfort, is really powerful, and doing the thing that like, you should do and you don't quite want to do. And coming from leaders, that means so much. People that work for you really want to see you as a person. So it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to feel a little awkward and stumble your way through a conversation.
Yeah.
And doing that is so much more powerful. So I still remember this 60-second conversation I had 6 years ago.
Right.
And it made me feel so much more motivated.
When people come to you and you start to coach them around leadership, what do you find gets in the way of them being vulnerable like that?
There's a belief that vulnerability is like it's a bad thing, like it's a weakness. There's a belief that we shouldn't be too friendly or close with our colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's generally a fear of a lack of respect that will come if people know who we really are and what we're really struggling with. Mm-hmm. And I try to teach people in my coaching engagements slowly and step by step how much the opposite is true, how much vulnerability is a real strength.
Yeah.
And how much when you open up with people, they will respect you more, they will trust you more, and they'll feel more committed to the group work that people are doing together.
How do you do that? What's one thing to show them how?
Well, so what I do, this is interesting, in the coaching engagements, what I like to do is open up to people and be vulnerable with them myself. And then I think that shows them, like then they can see it live, how powerful it can be when you're having a conversation with someone and they tell you something they're struggling with or an insecurity that they have. I was on a call last week with someone and we were talking actually about kind of like physical discomfort in a way. He was saying he gets really uncomfortable in video calls because he has to look at a little box of himself on the screen, and that really makes him uncomfortable, and he hates looking at himself all day, which I totally get. And I open up to him about a story about how like there's certain angles of myself I really don't like. I have somewhat of a bigger nose. And oftentimes I notice on a Zoom call when I look sideways, I'm like, ooh, nose is looking big today. And he really liked that. And it helped him get to know how I see myself and things that I struggle with and my own insecurities. So I do things like I model it with people, and then I encourage them, who can you have a conversation with that opens you up? How can you, maybe you can share with someone that you don't like being on Zoom because you don't like the way that you look sometimes. and see what that does for your relationship with that person. So it's that sort of modeling and behavior practice that can be powerful for people.
It's this term I like to use, vibes speak louder than words, right? So you can coach people all day long with your words, but if you don't show the behavior, like you defined vibes at the beginning of like a behavior, if you don't actually show the behavior or the vibe, your words could really sit flat. But by showing the vibe and showing the behavior, gosh, it just like opened up that person. That's so, so, so awesome.
Yeah, and we all know examples. I certainly have some in mind of when leaders talk the talk but don't walk the walk, and that people hate hypocrisy. There's
Hate
something
it.
about it.
Hate it. Yes. Yes. I think it's like a kid, right? Like there's like guardrails you give your kids so that they can make independent decisions. And then if they give guardrails publicly, but privately they do something else, then you're like just simply confused. Like, okay,
Yeah.
well, you said I could do that or said I couldn't do that, but you're doing that. It's like now they're just don't know how to move. And I think that's where like micromanagement sets in, right? Because then they start asking permission for
Mm.
everything versus like being their true authentic self to go do what they're intended to do in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what key learning from like a good vibe, a bad vibe? I know you talked about your 60-second experience, but is there something that every day still influences your leadership today? When you think about like the thing or things that you've experienced, what still influences you day in and day out? So I'll give you an example for me. Early
Yeah.
on in my career, I wanted to grow and develop. I was working in a corporate environment. And so I took it upon myself to reach out to somebody more senior than me and just ask if I could sit in some of like these meetings that she does, and so that I could learn and really see her in action and then take notes from that, have a
Yeah.
conversation about it. And somebody higher than her boss came and said like, how dare you do that? And it's like this leadership thing in my mind that influences me all the time. So when I'm working with a group of people, don't just kill somebody's spirit. That's how I felt, right? That was the
Mhm.
impact to me.
Yeah.
Perhaps that wasn't the intent, and maybe the intent wasn't articulated correctly, but the impact was like my spirit was killed. And it's like, why would I stay in an organization that doesn't, like, I'm taking my growth and development upon myself. Nobody has to do it for me. And so I think about that now when I'm working with others in a group of like, okay, what's the growth and development? If they go initiate something, I want to take that and run with it. Right. So it
Yeah.
influences me
Yeah.
all the time and how I operate working with others.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That was a really helpful example and inspired me to share with you what I think is frankly the underpinning of a lot of the coaching work that I do and a lot of the work I do in my own life too. And that is a mindset shift, which is going from a place of frustration and complaining and blaming to a place of acceptance and ownership and growth. And the shift is that so many people's problems at work, I find, come from their internal alignment and relationship towards work being one of conflict and one of, this isn't the right job for me. I need to get a raise. I need to get a promotion. I need to find a new job. I need to find a new career, and on the list goes. And so when I work with people, I always start from a place of, how would things change for you if I told you that you were in the perfect place for yourself right now? You are exactly where you belong, and you have so many opportunities in front of you. And that helps people shift from seeing all these challenges and things that are wrong and ways in which they are lacking what they really want, to one of like appreciation for what they have and seeing other people not as like an obstacle to their happiness. And that's what we do so often, especially with colleagues and coworkers, but seeing them as humans, as people, and seeing their own role in the problems that they've created. So seeing how their own communication styles have influenced where they stand today and their frustrations, their own behavioral patterns. So that shift to me is a really powerful one. And it's not a behavior, it's not a practical thing, but it's really powerful for people to sit and think about, what if this is the perfect job for me right now? What if I'm in the perfect place for myself? How would I approach the situation differently? And I use that all the time for myself when I notice myself getting really frustrated and stressed out. So it's related to the opening versus closing I mentioned at the beginning. We get so wound up and stressed and tight. And a really good first step and an important one is just to relax and loosen up personally and try to see the good. And then from there, you can start to improve and grow and learn and develop.
Okay, so Sam, personally, how did you get yourself to make this mindset shift? What has gotten you there? Because I have to imagine this has happened over time for you, right? So if you could give advice to others on like, or just share your story on how you got there, that would be awesome.
I got there over time, and I think I got there by paying attention to my everyday life and noticing that no matter where I went and where I got to, I was always looking for something else. So I would get, my first job was at a consulting company and I didn't care for it. I went and I got a new job that I thought was great at an investing company, and it sounded fun and fancy and nice, and it didn't quite feel right for me. And I left and went to an operating company and a software startup. And I've always felt like I was getting closer to what I really wanted to be doing, but I also just noticed every day was a constant struggle of, what do I need today to make myself happy? And how do I make a change in my life? And there was always sort of a fantasy of another life that was out there for myself that would somehow be the right one for me, and it would be perfect. Sometimes it was a really elaborate fantasy, like quitting my job and becoming a yoga teacher or a fly fisher. You know, those fantasies that I imagine everyone has. And then recently I started coaching, and I found a job I'm really passionate about. But I noticed the same problem chased me in a way, which was I was always looking for, how do I get now a stable business, and how do I get my income back to where I want it to be, and how do I work with the clients that I want to work with? And so that was constant. If I'm focused on the things that I don't have that I really want and the areas in which I'm lacking, I was never satisfied. And so I just remind myself of that now, and I pay attention every day to the ways in which I put happiness after success. And I try to change that. And I try to put the happiness for myself first, and know that if I'm able to do that and find happiness first and accept where I am today and all the wonderful things in my life, then I'll be more successful. And I think it's that sort of personal work that really helps team vibes. And I think leaders are, the problem with leadership and leaders is that it's great. It's fun. It makes us feel good and powerful, frankly. It's a real dopamine surge to be in charge. And that can tend to become part of our identity. And we take it more seriously, and we define ourselves by being successful people. And that can make it hard to actually do the simple things we need to do to take care of ourselves and be happy. I think in my own life, it's just been a process of noticing what really makes me happy, more so than what makes me successful, and trial and error. I'm always learning.
Yeah. Well, and this concept has been coming up for me a lot, and it's coming up again as you're talking, is like just pausing, right? So like our tendency is just to go onto the next, the to-do list, like all the social media, all of it is so fast. And if we just really take a minute to stop and pause and think, we might choose a different path to act, right? And we might go about something a different way than if we're just trying to check it off the to-do list to move on to the next thing. Because checking off might actually have the opposite effect we want on the vibe than just pausing to say, like, I'm going to get back to you, but I need a minute to think about it. I think there's like a genuine respect if you say that to somebody, and if there isn't, maybe you're in the wrong job, maybe you're in the wrong environment, maybe it's not aligned with your values. But yeah, I'm hearing you say, like, just take a minute and take a deep breath. I tell my kids that all the time. Take a deep breath. It's all going to be okay. But I need to remind myself of that too. And I think leaders need to hear that, because that impact that they're having by the go, 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 and not pausing, and the vibe it's creating is like this swell that is going to take a while to earn back.
I love the pause. I like to talk about checking in. And yeah, it's important. And I think leaders have so much positive reinforcement of, as you said, getting stuff done, doing stuff, being a machine, and being rigorous executors. And so that's how they behave. But the pausing and really doing it themselves, not just telling others to do it, but doing it themselves, so that we can all show up with energy and with excitement and with clarity. And sometimes in that pause, as you said, like, your whole perspective changes, and you realize when you're too close to a problem, it can be hard to see what's really happening. So stepping away, but it's really hard for people to do that nowadays. It's really hard to step away.
But that's why businesses call in consultants. It's not that they have some magic superpower. It's that sometimes that people inside are too close to the problem, so they need like a zoom out, right? It's just like, it's a simple fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they have a different mindset or perspective on it. It's really what it comes down to, right? Before we go, we're going to go into a quick little fun lightning round. But if there's one thing you could tell people and leaders that is so like near and dear, if you can articulate that in like one simple thing people can do after they listen to this to just try it out, try it on, see how it works for them, and see the ripple effect it has, what is that?
So I'm going to tell one more really quick story as an introduction to this, in terms of a bad vibes story. I was in a meeting once when I was younger, with a series of like older, really experienced operators and business leaders. And I remember one of them making a comment in that meeting, kind of laughing, chuckling to himself into the room, saying, "I don't know anything better than money for motivating people. I've never seen a better motivator of hard work than money." And everyone else kind of like laughed and was like, "Yes, sir." And I remember sitting there like a 25-year-old being like, I don't know if I feel good about that. I don't know if that's right. And it was one of the things that made me question whether or not I was in the right role for myself, and whether I wanted to continue working in the job that I was in. Because I know so many things that are better motivators than money. And one of those is a sense of belonging and commitment and appreciation. Appreciation is a really strong motivator of people. So my number one tip to leaders walking away from this is to imagine if you took appreciation and recognition as seriously in your organization as you did compensation and money, because it's really a free form of motivation that a lot of leaders don't use. So call someone into your office. Well, first, step one is to think about someone you really appreciate, who does a really good job, who works hard, and call them into your office and sit them down and have a really serious conversation where you appreciate their work. Like, take it as seriously as you take a conversation about them getting a raise, and just, speak to them from your heart about why you appreciate and recognize them. And I promise you that will stick with them longer and will motivate them longer than, hey, here's a 10% raise.
Yeah, money comes and goes, but those words like matter.
Yeah, people remember that.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to do like a really fun little lightning round for people to get to know you a little bit more. So it's not serious. It's just like, I'm going to challenge you to respond to these questions with one-word answers. Okay? And it's going to be fun.
Okay, fun.
Okay.
Okay, I have a hard time keeping my answers short, so this will be good practice.
It'll be this or that, this or that, this or that. And I'll read off like a few of them. Okay, coffee or tea?
Tea.
Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Beach or mountains?
Oh, recently mountains.
Morning or night?
Morning.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
Netflix or the movie theater?
Movie theater.
Texting or calling?
Calling.
And my last one, books or ebooks?
Books.
Awesome. Sam, thank you.
That was really fun, Kristi. Thank you.
Wow. If we all were just a little more open, imagine how the vibes would be positively impacted. Sam's coaching approach is aimed to improve vulnerability, listening skills, honesty, accountability, prioritization, clarity, stress management, and feedback. And that can't be done if we don't start with a mindset of openness. Seems super simple, right? However, this does require some intentionality, which can be challenging if we don't prioritize it. So I challenge each of you for the next 2 weeks to start your day with an open mindset and see what happens. Take notes of the small things. If you're interested in learning more about Sam, connect with him on LinkedIn at Sam Dailey or check out his work at growthmodecoaching.com. If this episode inspired you and you want to see how you can take the next step to creating a better vibe within your organization, I'd love for you to download our complimentary 75 Vibes worksheet. This is a simple tool to create a habit and mindset around creating great vibes in work and life. The best part, it's simple and it works.